The profound and wondrous Dharma is rarely encountered even in 100 million kalpas. Having it to hear, accept, and maintain, may I taste the truth of the Tathagata's words. Good morning, everyone. So this morning I want to continue our discussion through these online Sunday talks of taking care of our practice in the midst of COVID-19 and our changed society. And dealing with this is something we are sharing with billions of other people on a global scale, while how it's actually impacting us can vary tremendously, depending on our, who we are, our communities, our region, how it's impacting family, friends, and so on. As a particular focus for this morning, I want to look at Mara. Mara, and to approach the story of Mara as a kind of koan, and inquiring into Mara as a way of inquiring into our grasping, our fear, our distress, how we don't feel okay. And so how does a practice of awakening work with our varied and dynamic patterns of grasping in the predicaments of these strange and uncertain times? So Mara is a being we encounter in, especially in stories of the Buddha's awakening. So in these stories, Shakyamuni has sat down under the Bodhi tree, determined to realize awakening. Sometimes they say the place where Shakyamuni has sat down is the exact center of the Jambudvipa continent, or we could say basically it's the center of the world, the human world. And he's sitting down with this deep resolve, and this comes to the attention of Mara. And Mara is a deva, a god or a deity. And Mara, sometimes said to be the lord of the highest heavenly realm or celestial realm in the world of desire, in the Kamadhatu. And so Mara feels this sense of dominion over this entire realm, which includes humans. And he sees Shakyamuni with this resolve for liberation. And he's like, I need to go take care of that. So he comes to interrupt Shakyamuni's zazen. So this is the main koan of Mara, is Mara's attempts to interrupt Shakyamuni's zazen. And there's many different versions of this in different narratives of the Buddha's life. But one approach, Mara makes 3 attempts. So first, Mara sends armies of demons to inspire fear. Sometimes it's said this is 9 storms of wind, rain, rocks, weapons, embers, ashes, sand, mud, and darkness. So a huge assault. And this fails to move Shakyamuni. Sometimes in the iconography, there's depiction of arrows and other things being slung at the Buddha, and the Buddha is sitting peacefully, and right before they get to the Buddha, they turn into flowers. Second attempt to interrupt Shakyamuni's zazen is Mara's daughters, sometimes identified as thirst, discontent, and attachment. And they come forth and try to distract Shakyamuni. And here too, he remains still and upright. And so then third, Mara himself comes forth and tries to unseat the Buddha. And he questions the right of Shakyamuni to sit on this seat in the middle of the world, and this seat of awakening. And Mara says, it's I should be the one sitting there. I am after all the Lord of Kamadhatu. And in response, Shakyamuni reaches down and touches the earth, calling on the earth goddess as a witness to his virtue, that he belongs on this seat. And the earth bears witness, and the ground trembles, and Mara leaves, defeated and unable to unseat Shakyamuni. And so, when we hear this story, we can wonder, well, what actually is Mara? And does Mara come to visit us in Zazen? How does Mara appear? What are the ways Mara tries to interrupt our practice and unseat us? And so in this story, Mara's a deva, a deity, a god, an external being. And this is actually, in the teachings, there's actually multiple ways that Mara appears. And so this is sometimes referred to as the Deva Putra Mara, the Mara who's born a Deva. And this Mara is sometimes referred to as the evil one. And there's many different iconographical presentations of Mara, but like sometimes riding an elephant, sometimes with blue skin, sometimes with 2 arms, sometimes with 6 arms. And Mara appears as this force trying to disrupt awakening and liberation, and a force external to us, or we could say external to our volition, to our conscious effort. And there's these other forms of Mara that appear in the early teachings. There's a Klesha Mara. So this is Mara as the afflictions of mind, the afflictions which drive suffering, greed, hate, and delusion. Or we could also just say most basically grasping. Another form of Mara is Marana Mara, which is Mara identified as death. And yet another form of Mara is Skanda Mara, which is basically Mara as the whole world, our whole conditioned life, us and everything we experience. It's all subject to impermanence or death, Marana Mara. It's all under the sway of Mara as the afflictions, Klesha Mara. And so the whole world is involved in this process of suffering. So Mara's samsara. So Mara has this kind of complexity or ambivalence in the teachings. We have a kind of a psychological or moral Mara as mental afflictions, an existential Mara as death, an all-pervading or maybe ontological Mara as the world, as all conditioned things, and a cosmological and personalized Mara as this external deity. And we might want to simplify some of this complexity, and this is also reflected in the tradition. And so one way to do this is say, well, basically the psychological Mara is real, and the other Maras are kind of poetry. They're projections, dramatizations, metaphorical extensions, or myth. But I'd like to offer that we could embrace these different presentations of Mara as having a kind of versatility, and that there's a vitality in not privileging one over the others, and that we maybe not make Mara flat and less alive and less powerful and less disruptive. And maybe wanting to make Mara small could be the work of Mara. And the idea that that Mara and that this force of disruption is totally psychological and that it's all here. I think we could look at that as a kind of myth. It's a kind of myth that goes along with other myths that look at myths as myths, like faith and rationality and the scientific method as being suitable for encountering matters of the heart. So I think we can see like Mara as a totally external deity is kind of a myth, but it's kind of a myth to feel that like this isolated individual has a act microcosm of the whole process of suffering and the whole process of awakening. I think most basically we can say Mara is the gesture of grasping. So the Buddha taught, it makes no difference what you grasp. When you grasp, Mara stands beside you. And then also Mara has this particular manifestation of grasping that arises as we find the seed of liberation. And grasping is something we have internalized. It's something we do, but it's not self-created. It arose through relationality. And so it's the activity of the self, but its roots are beyond the self. Our grasping and our delusion are not simply our doing. They're informed by our genetics, our biology, our nurturance, family and culture, and many lineages reaching back, beyond our apprehension. So I'm kind of interested in looking at Mara as an intertwining of these the psychological and existential and cosmological. And this kind of intertwining or traversing inner and outer is a way to approach Mara, a way to approach our grasping and the modalities of Mara in this story. So Mara, we could look at Mara as a force of spiritual stasis, or limiting growth, limiting liberation, limiting love. And how this force manifests is, or can be, vigorous and multifarious and dynamic. So it can have these, sometimes it can feel psychological, sometimes it might also feel cosmological, or it might feel existential, or it might feel like the world. So we could feel it in our own dispositions, but we could also feel it as death. We could feel it as a force beyond our control. We could feel it as a god or a devil or a demon or a world leader or a ghost or an irresistible temptation. One of the most common ways maybe to encounter Mara is a voice in our head. And still, there we can wonder, whose voice is that? Whose voice is this? Where is this coming from? So we have kind of a more conceptual, analytical approach, this psychological approach, but we also have approaches, more grounded in story and allegory and poetry and image and myth. And we don't need to see those as mutually exclusive. And we can affirm both. Affirm the analytical and the imaginative and the creative, the dream life. And when we look at Mara in the context of this story, Mara is engaged in a dynamic with the seed of awakening. And so another part of this koan is like, what is this seat? What is the seat of awakening? The Bodhimanda. Sometimes we say anywhere we sit zazen is the Bodhimanda, is the seat of awakening. And I've heard at least that this is part of the reason why, we might bow to our seat. Even if we're sitting by ourselves, we can bow to our seat as the site of awakening. Honoring that, this place is our place, just like the Buddha sitting under the Bodhi tree. And finding our place is finding our center of the world. And this center is our life, right here as the nexus of myriad unfathomable causes and conditions meeting here on as our life. And it includes the history of the whole universe right here. It also includes our unique particular history. And I feel like I think of this as this of awakening, the seat of connection, the seat of agency and action, the seat of love and compassion, the seat of just being ourselves, just completely being this person, the seat of manifesting our awakened nature. And I feel like when we feel out this seat, that just like Mara, our seat intertwines psychological, existential, cosmological, mythological dimensions of our being. So Mara has these 3 attempts to unseat Shakyamuni. These are 3 modalities of Mara, or 3 ways Mara works, 3 ways Mara operates, 3 ways grasping works, 3 ways death works, 3 ways the world works. They're modalities of stasis, of being stuck, or the ways we get knocked off our seat, challenges to awakening, ways we don't fully meet our lives. And and we're going to look at these as 3 for today. But but Mara, or grasping, defies this enumeration or classification. Grasping is dynamic, and so its modalities twist and turn together. And so actually you can't really separate these, or they don't necessarily come 1, 2, 3. They can all come at once. And these are fields of awakened inquiry. How do we find the seat of awakening and connection and love as Mara approaches and tries to unseat us? How do the particular conditions of our life interface with the workings of Mara? And and particularly in these times. So first, Mara sends armies of demons. So we may feel attacked, we may feel assaulted or assailed, and in many different ways. We may feel attacked through a voice of judgment, a rebuke or rejection, through physical or emotional pain, through a pandemic, this We may feel attacked by the face of an enemy, or at times the face of a friend, a loved one. We may feel attacked by people in power or by policies, by terminal illness, the inevitability of death, economic stress, and many other forms. We can meet the face of Mara. And so part of what's happening here is, how do we get unseated by fear? It's seems to be hard for people to sit in the fullness of fear. It seems actually for a lot of people, it's hard to sit with even a thin sliver of fear. And so it's actually pretty common to completely avoid or deny our fear, to find ways to just turn away from it altogether. And basically, if an honest report is, I'm not afraid, I don't have fear right now. But there is fear. And when we turn away from our fear, we turn away from our seat, finding our place, finding the seat of awakening. In these last few weeks, I go out shopping for food, and those are times that I can notice fear. I can notice fear in myself, and I can see fear basically all around me. And we can learn to feel our fear, and we can learn to be fully okay with our fear, to welcome fear. And I think we feel into, where is the fear manifesting in our bodies, and we attune to the quality and the texture of how fear is manifesting. And we might notice if our experience of fear has a shape, and what's giving it that shape. Sometimes it has a shape because it's being impacted by our attempts to manage or minimize or confine our fear. So we feel all around our fear. And again, it's just awareness. We trust in the maturing illumination of awareness. Another response to feeling attacked is to fight back. And we can actively fight or resist what is happening. We can get angry. And this anger can cover our fear or vulnerability. And this opens into the whole human realm of domination, controlling through force, violence. Do you think the signal's getting bad?
Ask people if they're hearing you okay.
If it's not coming through, okay, maybe leave a chat, leave a message in the chat, or you can wave. But we're worried that the signal's not coming through. No, don't see. Oh no, there's someone waving. Some people thumbs up.
Okay, I think I got that.
Okay. Mara wants us to fight Mara. Or resisting Mara makes Mara stronger. Resisting our fear and our pain and anxiety gives power to our fear, pain, and anxiety. Mara is happy for us to try and judge our way into being good, or judge our way into deep practice, or to think this shouldn't be happening. So how then do we practice with the forces that oppose practice? So the Buddha does not fight the demon armies. With courage and gentleness and clarity, the Buddha sits still and upright. And these arrows are transmuted into flowers. So when we fully welcome them, fear, anger, trying to control what's happening, and so on, these turn into flowers. And these fear and anger flowers are not the absence of fear and anger, but how fear and anger open in non-grasping and become part of the vital fullness of being ourself. So these, in these depictions, fear and anger and this attack adorn the seed of awakening. They form a kind of halo around the Buddha. There's kind of this nice circle of flowers, and then coming out of the circles, the flowers, you can still see the arrows, like the light of awakening. So second is Mara's daughters, thirst, discontent, and attachment. And this can kind of feel like the opposite of being attacked. So rather than an assault, Mara's alluring us. But in the essential, effort to draw us away from our seat, it's intertwined with the first. And in a way, it's more subtle. So it's not trying to use force, but temptation and persuasion, some attractive alternative. And the images here are typically Mara's 3 daughters dancing around the Buddha. Sometimes we also hear that Mara has 3 sons: confusion, pleasure, and pride. So I kind of want to just maybe talk about the progeny of Mara. The children, offshoots, or elaborations of grasping, dancing all around, or dancing all inside. I associate this modality of Mara with, well, basically, it could be anything we want, whether we're proud of it or not. But the allure of pleasure, consumption, possession, ownership, status, recognition, fame, wealth, power, comfort. And it can manifest as a kind of escapism, distraction, restlessness, or obsession, intoxication, addiction. And if the first attack was kind of in some way about death, this is about clinging to life, continuity, legacy, property, heirs. And pleasure and comfort are not bad, but when they appear as a face of Mara, when there's grasping, pleasure or comfort can be a force that draws us away from our lives. Mara wants us to get lost in fantasy, totally involved, and forget the place where we are, forget the seat of awakening, the seat of connection. Mara wants us to grasp and pursue fulfillment outside of our life right here. And if in our effort to practice, we try to turn away from Mara's daughters and Mara's progeny and seek escape from that also makes Mara happy. So resistance still makes Mara stronger. So Buddha is still an intimate in the middle of these dancing offspring of grasping, not touching, not turning away. So awakening meets the children of Mara without grasping, without trying to possess or escape, without trying to become someone else. Mara wants us to seek freedom from the world rather than the freedom in the world, freedom from life rather than freedom in our life. And when we project this kind of escapism onto practice, it becomes spiritual bypassing. We use the teachings and the practice as modalities of escape. In these times, we might see this modality of Mara in a kind of in turning towards comfort. Or we might notice, some grasping to a certain solace and safety in our individual safety. I also feel that, like, as a modality of possession and ownership, that Mara extends, this modality extends to appropriation and colonization and privilege. And this is one of the reasons why I want to look at Mara in kind of relational terms, rather than just something simply internal or external. And so looking practices and including, the systems we live in, these cultural systems, how they work, how our upbringing in these systems has shaped us. And James Baldwin says, history is literally present in all that we do. So inquiring into, forms of bias and prejudice that are often subtle and unconscious, but they condition our perception, our experience, our interactions, and our participation in the structures of this society. So systemic Mara. And in this time, we see certain forms of privilege are still functioning quite strongly, and especially in who dies in this country. So, we can stay awake to our privilege. So third, or finally, Mara moves from trying to unseat the Buddha through force or through distraction to employing, you could say, deception and confusion. So Mara says Shakyamuni is not worthy to sit on the seat of awakening. And this is more subtle, but it's can be very powerful. So Mara is leading us, from fighting suffering or resisting to escaping, basically to identifying with suffering. And this can come as words in our head, words from another person, assumptions and expectations of self and others, feelings and emotions. And conclude any sense that we're not worthy, the sense we don't belong, or the sense we're not okay, or not completely okay. And the more deeply we relax, the more deeply we take this seat of awakening, these voices can arise and visit us in new and more powerful ways. And so in response to these words of Mara, the Buddha touches the earth, and the earth shakes in affirmation. The earth shakes with our belonging. The place where we are, in this moment, this is a seat of belonging. So again, the Buddha does not fight or argue with Mara, and the Buddha does not try to escape. And I feel like this touching the earth, and this is something we also see a lot. There's a lot of images of the Buddha touching the earth, the right hand. I see here like an expression of the intimate relationship of stillness and the stillness of intimate relationship. So touching the earth is like an expression of Zazen. Zazen is touching the body, touching the heart mind, touching our feelings, touching our lives. And being fully okay with being this person. And if we don't feel okay with being this person, noticing that and being okay with that. Wherever we sit is the Bodhimanda, the seat of awakening. Keizan, a key Soto Zen ancestor, taught every single person, without exception, is a vessel of the way. Some of us have been sitting together, sitting Zazen together on Zoom, and actually, many of you came a little bit early today, and we sat Zazen. And in some ways, it's kind of a funny thing to do, to sit Zazen together in this way, quote, together. I think we all miss the aliveness of actually being together, body to body, mind to mind, heart to heart, true nature to true nature. And still, there's this limited form of connection with computers and phones and devices. Can provide a kind of a big support. So, what helps us feel connected? What helps us find the seat of awakening, which is also the seat of connection, the seat of total relationality. And so even if we're not in the same room, we share a moment together. And I feel there's something really important in the meaning and weight of being in this moment together. And I feel like it's connected to like why people aren't interested in watching old sports or reading old news. When we share in this moment, we can experience a sense of genuine interplay. And so connection is totally intimate with agency and participation, understanding how our life matters. And we need that reflected. So even sitting quietly together, not really using our speakers and microphones, not even necessarily looking at our screens, there is some connection and there's some reflection there, some actualization of our interplay in this moment, because when we're sitting, we're not shutting down, we're opening up. I think we are an irreplaceable part of the universe. And it's important for our irreplaceability to be reflected. It's nourishing and organizing, but it's not, doesn't necessarily come as somebody saying like you're irreplaceable. It can come as you're sitting together with computers. So I feel like touching the earth can also be connecting through Zoom. And our sitting together is a collective affirmation of every single person, without exception, is a vessel of the way. So we might hear echoes of this modality of Mara as, if we're sheltering in place, and then there's these voices questioning whether we should be staying at home. We may encounter the face of Mara and the deep uncertainty we are collectively facing. Doubt and uncertainty have great potential to unseat us. Certainty can also unseat us. I feel one of the challenges of this time is that we have this intense uncertainty. We don't know what the next few months or even the next few years look like. And we're faced with an overload of information, competing ideas, recommendations, rumors, reports, data, interpretations of data, predictions, and so on. How do we find our way through all of this? And this information can be really powerful. Some of it can send us into a panic. Some of us can give us a false sense of security. Some can kind of raise our spirits and give us hope. Some can leave us with despair. And so this is a field of practice. The self and inquiring into how we're impacted by information. And Mara is all around us. And there's this overload of information. And saw the phrase, there's also a pandemic of misinformation. And we can attend to how we're manipulated. Misinformation can acquire a quality of seeming true in various ways. One of those ways is just repetition. Just through repeated exposure, things seem more true. It could basically be anything. And social media is now a big part of information distribution. And social media, it doesn't tend to incentivize truth, but what gets attention. So touching the earth in the midst of all this information, staying in touch with ourselves, touching the earth and connecting with others, touching the earth and finding good, balanced, reliable information. And touching the earth can also be not holding to any information or belief too rigidly as grasping. Another thing I came across is studies have found that pandemics impact how our minds work on a kind of basic instinctual level. And that fear of contagion can lead us to become more harsh and judgmental and more biased against difference and nonconformity. And so this could be a factor, in expressions of xenophobia and racism and ableism. When we feel threatened by an infection, we unconsciously project onto any observable difference and association with the virus. It's kind of like an overcompensation to try and keep ourselves safe. Again, a basic unconscious instinctual level. And so we develop a heightened sense of distrust and suspicion, fear of nonconformity. And this can manifest through prejudice and discrimination. So here too, we can touch the earth, find our seat, and find the seat of being deeply in touch with ourselves, and attend to how we're being impacted, how we're being affected in these times. So after the Buddha touches the earth, Mara departs, and the Buddha in the story opens completely into awakening. And I think we can look at this apparent relinquishment of Mara as a kind of fourth challenge to awakening. And it's kind of inviting us to abide in awakening as an attainment. Or we might think, oh, I belong here and this is my seat. And make this seat into a kind of a nest and a place to hang out, and that this peace will last. And we might want to make it permanent. And it might seem like Mara's been completely defeated. But even though Mara has disappeared, Mara is actually still present, silently tempting us to try and take possession of this seat of awakening. So the way we take care of awakening is we let it go. The way we take care of any release, relief, and peace in our practice is we let it go. And there's no abiding on the seat of awakening. The practice of awakening, connection, love, and being ourselves is always dynamic. We endlessly find our place, open awakening, and go beyond that. So sometimes this touching the earth, mudra, hand position, is also called the defeat of Mara, hand position, mudra. But in the stories of the Buddha, Mara continues to visit the Buddha for the rest of his life at all sorts of critical junctures. So on the cosmological level, Buddha does not utterly vanquish Mara. They interact throughout the Buddha's whole life. And then like on an existential level, life does not overcome death. They're always intimate and inseparable. And likewise, nirvana does not overcome samsara. Nagarjuna says there's not even a tiny bit of samsara apart from nirvana, and not even a tiny bit of nirvana apart from samsara. And psychologically, or in terms of like an individual mind stream, awakening does not overcome grasping. They endlessly unfold. It's always dynamic. And it's more like a dance. So we always keep our eyes open for Mara, but not exactly as an enemy, but as the ever unfolding twists and turns of grasping and delusion. In all the stories of the Buddha, actually, we don't see Buddha living with Mara as an enemy. Awakening is curious about the ways of Mara. Through practice, we come to know Mara more and more deeply. And the creativity and vigor and energy of Mara intimately turns with and reflects and becomes the life, energy, and dynamism of awakening. And I thought about this in terms of in like baseball, that like a great pitcher can only fully express their capacity if they face a great hitter. And likewise, a great hitter can only actualize their real potential if they face a great pitcher. So our deepest potential as vessels of the way is only fully actualized through meeting profound challenges. So there's a saying, the greater the mud, the bigger the Buddha. And I have a show and tell item here. It's a watercolor painting by Dojin Sarah. And she made this for my birthday, which was 1 week ago. Let's see, there it is. So it's Mara. It's Mara as kind of a demon. It's Mara intimately facing a great big heart. So right here in our lives, we face challenges to completely being ourselves, to actualizing awakening, to fully loving, to meaningful participation in the world. We're always in the fray. And in this spirit, I offer this koan of Mara. Thank you. So are there any expressions? Oh, and you will need to unmute yourself, which you can either do by pressing that little microphone, or I think if you have a computer, you can press the space bar and hold it down. Press and hold the space bar to speak.
I'm not doing anything.
Thank you for this excellent talk. I mean, it was just awesome. I really enjoyed it. I was writing some of this stuff down. Can you tell me again, here, you hold this, who the sons and daughters are?
Oh.
I've got pleasure, pride, and who was?
Thirst, discontent, and attachment.
Thirst,
Discontent.
discontent.
And attachment are the daughters. Now there are, in different stories of the Buddha, sometimes the daughters have different names.
Yeah.
I mean, there's different translations, but there's also different Sanskrit names for the daughters. And the, let's see, where were the sons? Where was that in here?
Pleasure, pride, and something.
Confusion, pride, and pleasure.
Oh, confusion. Okay. Well, thank you. This is like a good basis for some great art projects.
Yeah, it's a lot of great iconography around Mara. Yeah.
Hi, this is Thomas. Thank you for your talk. Can you talk more about confusion as a son of Mara?
Well, I think Mara wants to confound us, I think, and so one form of confusion is being confused about our worthiness as vessels of awakening, or that this is our seat, or that we belong here. Mara could try to confuse us into thinking that like possession is love. Mara could try to fool us into thinking that fighting fear is the way to live with fear. So I see confusion all over the place.
Charlie, I liked the constant metaphor you used for touching the earth to keep the Buddha grounded away from Mara. That's a great one.
Yeah,
And Jusho had mentioned it when, I don't know when, a while ago. But I noticed those obvious statues over my life, but I didn't really realize what it meant. And she mentioned it, but when you've reiterated it throughout your talk, it was very poignant times in your talk. It was great. Thank you.
Oh, great. Thanks. Yeah, but I've always loved that mudra, and we get to do new things with it. Oh, Dojin just said the Buddha on the altar at Stone Creek is an earth touching mudra.
Are we there? I was going to say, just now you were talking about that one of the sons was confusion, and you're talking about that you're confused about, like that possession, is you can possess somebody and that's love or whatever. And I think it's really important to think about now how, I hate to bring his name up, but you know, our president, really sows a lot of confusion, and I think, and that leads to fear. And he's really just like a, I don't know, maybe he's a big son of Mara or something, or Mara himself or something. But it's an interesting way to think of him, and I appreciate that. I mean, in relation to your talk. Thanks.
Yeah. I think we might experience world leaders as manifestations of Mara. Yeah. Yeah. No, there's a lot of problems with some of the things that he's saying. I think profound problems.
Thank you for your talk. I'd like to echo what Robin said about touching the earth. For me, something meaningful throughout my day is my breath. To come back to that if I notice that I'm feeling tense or something's off. But I can very much imagine now touching the earth also to add another little mini meditative moment to get me back. Yeah. So thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. Great. All right. Well, maybe we'll chat. Oh, Liz. Yeah, okay. You can be the last one.
Okay. Want to express gratitude for this talk.
We're not getting what you're saying, Liz.
Does this work?
Oh yeah, that's better now. Oh, no, we've lost you again. Can you hear Liz?
No, I can't see her either.
I can see you moving, and I can't hear what you're saying. Oh, no, she's been muted. Oh, try unmuting.
Or try shutting off the camera and asking the question, because it.
Okay, what about this?
Can hear you. Yes. It's good.
I wanted to express gratitude for the talk and the ongoing material in Mara not being an enemy, not in holding all of these seemingly oppositional things and confusion as creating trying to eliminate the friction that stops us from looking at it.
Yeah. How we really get to know Mara. And I think there are places where Buddha just says, like, I see you, Mara. I know you, Mara. And Thich Nhat Hanh he actually has a whole thing where like the Buddha's like super happy to see Mara. and Ananda's like, you know, or there's another place where like Mara comes to the door and Buddha's sick, and Ananda's like, oh, I gotta keep him out of here, and the Buddha says, no, let him in. Yeah, they're good old friends. All right, well, let's do the vows. Great Bodhisattva vows. Means are numberless. I vow to free them. Delusions are inexhaustible. I vow to end them. Dharma gates are infinite. I vow to enter them. The Buddha way is boundless. I vow to realize